Welcome to House of History. Last week we have seen the Great Elector's 48-year reign. It was marked by war and struggle, but it ensured the future generations of House Hohenzollern of one very important certainty: sovereignty over Ducal Prussia. This week his son Frederick III makes work of the potential bestowed upon him after succeeding his father as Elector of Brandenburg in 1688. He embarked on a painstaking process of diplomacy and negotiations. Eventually, his efforts would be rewarded with the first royal title of the Hohenzollern family. Through diplomacy, he had achieved what his father quite literally fought towards all his life. Frederick III would become known as the first king in Prussia. Welcome to the complete history of Prussia. As we will see in the future with many Hohenzollerns, Frederick was part of a rather large family with brothers and sisters, and he wasn't the firstborn son. Born in 1657 to Frederick Wilhelm, the Great Elector, and his first wife, Louise Henriette von Nassau, Frederick was actually their third son. The first son was born during the last year of the 30 Years' War, 1648, and passed away shortly after. The second son, Charles Emile, did survive infancy and was the expected heir to the throne for quite some time. Now, I delve into the bond between fathers and sons in the aptly named series Fathers and Sons. Suffice to say that Charles Emile was the Great Elector's favorite, showing a keen interest in military and state affairs from an early age, whereas Frederick was a more reserved boy that enjoyed arts and high culture. During the Franco-Dutch War in the 70s, Charles Emile commanded an army, fell ill during the campaign and passed away of dysentery at the age of 19. Frederick now became the designated successor of his father, who wasn't too happy about it. The relationship between the father and son did not improve during the Great Elector's lifetime. It got so bad that in 1687, following the death of Frederick's third brother Ludwig at the age of 20, Frederick became paranoid that there was a plot to assassinate all male heirs from the father's first marriage. The would-be culprit was his father's second wife, Sophia Dorothea of Schleswig-Holstein, because she would want to put her firstborn son on the throne. Eventually, the King of England and Holy Roman Emperor had to intervene to salvage the bond between father and son. By this point, the Great Elector had publicly declared he cut out Frederick from the inheritance. Just a few months before his death in 1688, the problem was resolved. And when the Great Elector passed away, Frederick became Frederick III, Elector of Brandenburg and Duke of Prussia. There were some issues with the inheritance, but eventually Frederick prevailed and managed to maintain the integrity of all territories. As he ascended, the 9 Years' War broke out between France and the Great Alliance of Austria, the Dutch Republic, England, among other states and duchies, and Brandenburg, Prussia. Being a son of an Oranje-Nassau, Frederick became one of the most loyal allies of William III of Orange. While Brandenburg and Prussia were safe from war, the duchies in the west, here in green, that were under Hohenzollern control did see warfare. Frederick visited the Dutch Republic twice during that time, with war being concluded in 1697. During these years, something else was brewing in the background, something that would characterize Frederick's reign. At least from 1696 onwards, Frederick actively pursued several diplomatic negotiations towards a goal that would change the position of House Hohenzollern forever. He wanted to acquire a royal title, but acquiring the title king wasn't as clear-cut as it may seem, and for years Frederick embarked on painstaking negotiations with multiple influential parties within the European theater. Now, in order to understand how an elector of the Holy Roman Empire would be able to crown himself king, we have to go back to the Treaty of Westphalia, by this point signed half a century ago. The conditions of the treaty that ended the 30 Years' War curtailed, if not destroyed, the power of the Holy Roman Emperor. The prestige of the office had eroded. German princes became virtual sovereigns of their own estates, and they certainly felt like it. Yet, it was forbidden for anyone to hold the title of king within the empire. The empire and emperor still existed, and it would be an unwise provocation that would certainly warrant a military response if an elector suddenly crowned himself king within the empire. As a matter of fact, it was not until Napoleonic times, a century later, that the kings of Bavaria, Saxony, and Württemberg came into existence, and their ascension to the throne signaled the real end of empire. During this time, within the Holy Roman Empire, only two royal titles were permitted, that of King of the Romans, held by the Emperor, and King of Bohemia. But some electors of the empire were kings of territories outside of the empire. They made use of a loophole, so to say. Royal crowns of foreign territories were acquired in order to boost the prestige of a house. For example, Augustus II, the Strong of House Wettin, was Elector of Saxony but became King of Poland in 1697 when he was elected as such. George I of House Welf was King of Great Britain from 1714 while also being Elector of Hanover. Unfortunately, under Frederick Wilhelm, the Great Elector, no foreign lands were waiting for House Hohenzollern, but a sharp observer will have noticed that East Prussia since 1466 had not belonged to the empire, but had been under Polish sovereignty for several centuries. In last episode, we have seen that the Great Elector managed to gain sovereignty over Ducal Prussia during the Second Northern War, first from Sweden, and after the Polish crown regained its power from Poland. As our Frederick III became the Elector, he now doubled as both the Elector in the empire and as sovereign over Ducal Prussia. The opportunity to become king presented itself just like it had to the Welfs and Wettins. The negotiations began during the 1690s, and it would take several years of difficult and tricky negotiations between him and both Emperor Leopold I and Augustus the Strong, King of Poland. As often happened in the history of Prussia, the Elector owed good fortune to international developments he had absolutely no control over. In 1700, over in Habsburg Spain, Charles II passed away without children. Several monarchs claimed the right to the Spanish throne, a dispute that would eventually lead to the War of the Spanish Succession between the Habsburgs, Bourbons, and their respective allies. Frederick had supported a candidate for the Spanish throne, Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I, in the hopes that he would manage to gain a royal title through that channel. And well, Leopold definitely did require the Elector's support when the war finally broke out. Frederick exploited this, and in return for the Contractrat, or Crown Treaty, the Elector eventually pledged his support for the Emperor. He supplied 8,000 soldiers, and in return the Emperor acknowledged the royal title. The Elector had a more difficult time convincing Augustus the Strong, King of Poland, to acknowledge his royal title. In fact, Augustus declared the coronation illegal and reasoned Ducal Prussia still belonged to Poland. The Elector had to concede a bit here, which led to the unusual title of King in Prussia. Augustus made sure the Elector was aware of his subservient position to his. After all, Poland still laid claim to Western Prussia, and Augustus wasn't eager to give Frederick any reason to assert a historical claim to that territory. There were others that opposed the coronation. The papacy and the Teutonic Order did not recognize Frederick's ambition to acquire the title. As a matter of fact, they had not even recognized Duke Albrecht's secularization of the territory nearly 200 years before. The Teutonic Order throughout the centuries hadn't died out. It still existed, though they certainly had faded to the background ever since Grand Master turned Duke Albrecht's decision to abandon his vows back in 1525. Its organization and recruiting structure had survived throughout the centuries. It would not be until 1809 that Napoleon dissolved the order, although it continues to exist to this day. Now, after Albrecht secularized the Duchy of Prussia, the order had allied themselves with the House of Habsburg, perhaps even less staunchly Catholic than the order. Now, from the Habsburg stronghold Austria, the order mustered up all its power and approached all those in their network to prevent the illegitimate and stolen by the Hohenzollerns territory of Prussia to now be recognized as a kingdom. Perhaps the influence of the order was already waning. As far as we could tell, their loud objections did not matter. Frederick III, Elector of Brandenburg, Duke of Prussia, managed to push through his plans in order to acquire the first royal title for House Hohenzollern. On the 18th of January 1701, Elector Frederick III of Brandenburg was crowned in Königsberg. It was an event full of splendor, riches, and grandiosity. The coronation was the single most expensive event in the history of Brandenburg Prussia. Around twice the annual revenue of the entire Hohenzollern administration was spent on the ceremony. And Frederick? Well, he was henceforth known as Frederick I, King in Prussia. An interesting detail is that his second wife, the cultured Sophie Charlotte, Princess of Hanover, opposed the coronation as she figured it was against Hanoverian interests, and during the coronation she found it boring to the degree that she distracted herself with snuff. Nevertheless, Frederick I crowned himself and then his wife, a symbolic gesture of worldly power and the superior position of House Hohenzollern as compared to all other German dynasties. We're all probably thinking it though, in Prussia. The inn was a blemish, but while it was a concession Frederick was forced to make for the sake of recognition, it only applied to the outside world. Internally, Frederick was right from the start the unchallenged first king of Prussia. He wasn't a Margrave of Brandenburg, a Duke of Prussia, and a counter prince elsewhere. All his lands were now agglomerated as the Kingdom of Prussia. I believe that is where we started the series of Prussia's history. How did the sovereign kingdom get its name Prussia, that far eastern territory that wasn't even linked to Brandenburg, the central hub of the Hohenzollerns? The people of Brandenburg, the Rhineland or Westphalia, obviously never thought they would call themselves Prussian, a territory far east that the vast majority of them had never even visited. But they didn't have a choice. Their ruler was now the king in Prussia, and they constituted Prussian subjects governed by royal Prussian officials. Fortunately for the Hohenzollerns, human nature tends to adjust to changes such as these within a few generations. It would not take long for the subjects of the Hohenzollerns to agree to, even be proud of, their new name. It would take 2 more generations until there finally would be a formal king of Prussia, which would be Frederick's grandson, Frederick the Great. As the king got comfortable in his new position, he would not enter the history books as a characteristically heroic king, but as someone that enjoyed high culture, the arts, and looked closely at court life in France in order to shape his own court life that way. He maintained an educated court, which stood out, considering the Margravate of Brandenburg was once known for allowing the free reign of robber barons, and the Prussia around the Vistula with its unruly bunch of nobles. Some historians describe him as vain, with his court a sad attempt to mimic the Sun King of France, and with his obsession for regal pomp and dignity partially related to a spinal deformity that was akin to that of a hunchback. Which is ironic, Wilhelm II, the last German Kaiser over 2 centuries later, had a deformity on his arm, and the same obsession with splendor. The Hohenzollern royal line began and ended with cripples. Contemporaries remarked, though probably with a strong whiff of irony, that his capital in Berlin was the Athens on the Spree. It was under this king the first noteworthy buildings were built in Berlin, the palace and armory. An extensive pleasure garden was constructed in Charlottenburg. The aesthetics of the capital radically increased, and expenditures of the court skyrocketed. Furthermore, in 1688, Frederick appointed Samuel Pufendorf as court historiographer. His father, the Great Elector, had invited Pufendorf, but passed away before he could arrive. The next 6 years, Pufendorf would write a history of the Great Elector's reign using archived documents, something that could be considered revolutionary for the time. Before Frederick was crowned king, he had already founded the Academy of Arts and the Royal Scientific Society. He was a patron of the arts of Andreas Schlüter, a Baroque sculptor and architect, among others. It was Schlüter who designed sculptures and statues of the king's predecessors, most notably the Great Elector. It helped that he married a cultured and intellectual second wife, Sophia Charlotte of Hanover, sister of King George of England. At court, she surrounded herself with philosophers and was a patron of Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a multidisciplinary mathematician, philosopher, physicist, historian, among many other areas of expertise. According to Frederick's son and successor, Frederick Wilhelm I, his court was the craziest household in the world. A telling example of the king's taste for festivities and grandeur was the funeral of his second wife in 1705. 2 battalions had to bring the corpse back to Berlin, while the deepest mourning that was possible was to be observed. Long black cloaks were the only attire allowed at court, and the entire court was transformed into a building of mourning. Another interesting thing that happened 3 years later. In Switzerland, the Principality Neuchâtel's ruler's house became extinct, and the Protestant Principality wanted to avoid coming under Catholic rule. Although Catholic France tried very hard, eventually the people of Neuchâtel chose Frederick as their new ruler. I'll save you the complicated hereditary connections he based his claims on. From now on, the Principality of Neuchâtel was ruled in personal union with Prussia until 1806, when Napoleon removed the then king, and again from 1813 to 40. It was a small principality in territory, but it does show that the Prussian king started to earn international recognition within the European theater. As all this was going on, the Spanish War of Succession still waged on in the background. Not that it affected the new king too much. After all, his participation was a trade-off for the royal title. 6 noteworthy battles were fought by Prussia, including the Battle of Malplaquet in 1709. It is considered one of the bloodiest modern battles with great losses for Prussia and its allies. The king's son, Frederick Wilhelm, distinguished himself for bravery, earning him praise from the Duke of Savoy. His bravery in battle wasn't too surprising, though, for the 21-year-old would eventually become Frederick Wilhelm I, Prussia's soldier king. Well, I won't cast judgment on whether the king's endeavors were worth it. His grandson, Frederick II, who would become known as the Great, certainly has done that. He called the pomp, money, and effort no more than an indulgence of the elector's vanity. He was more concerned with appearances than with useful things that are soundly made. And to be fair, the king's court did incur more costs than it could sustain, but it wasn't like he was a historical anomaly. Then again, Frederick the Great was sharp enough to observe that it was also a masterpiece of statesmanship. It saved the House of Brandenburg from the yoke of servitude, referring to Austria and the other German princes. The royal title certainly embodied status, power, and prestige. The intangible benefits may have been greater than the temporary costs attached to it. Ironically, it was the first and last generation of Hohenzollerns for a long while that enjoyed a rich coronation ceremony. Frederick I, king in Prussia, passed away in 1713. His son succeeded him and dispensed entirely any coronation ritual and dismantled the court establishment. He had developed a deep antipathy to these pompous aspects during his youth, and his son, Frederick's grandson, would take after his father and sober up the Prussian state as well. As such, Prussia evolved to a kingdom without coronations. Frederick managed to lay the basis for a population proud of calling themselves Prussians, and for Prussia to become a sovereign kingdom. His son was given the building blocks to expand the army to the degree that Prussia could compare itself to other European great powers. His epitaph is very fitting for his reign, for he would become Frederick Wilhelm I, Prussia's soldier king. It took several centuries, but Prussia's real history as a kingdom had officially begun. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure you check out the playlist with the complete history of Prussia on screen. I would also like to thank all my patrons for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and want to support my work, consider checking me out on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you will gain access to the exclusive Patreon series. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.